you're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're going to be discovering what splitting is, understanding splitting, being able to understand the concept, and being able to see if you're dealing with somebody now who is splitting, or if maybe you have yourself, what it does, what it is, and how it can impact us in our day-to-day life. Oftentimes, when somebody is splitting, they're not even aware that they are doing it. And so being able to have this awareness to understand what it is can be very powerful. If somebody is splitting when it comes to you, making decisions about you, you can understand that and you can see it better after listening to this podcast and better understanding the processes that take place and the reasons for why somebody might actually split in a situation. Now, splitting, is a psychological concept for some of us that we probably understand. Some of you might have been dealing with it with a spouse, significant other, family member, or friend. Maybe some of you, have realized that there's been times that you have actually participated in splitting. And so one way or another, we're going to explore that today. And I think it's interesting because a lot of folks, instead of using the word splitting, has actually taken on the concept of black and white thinking, right? So that's kind of interchangeable. Whether it's splitting or black and white thinking, we're talking about the same thing to some degree. So we can use either one of those for right now. What I found is that when somebody is splitting, right, they can see something a certain way. If somebody is seeing things black and white, they are seeing things as either good or bad, right? You're either seeing people for you and rallying for you and being there for you, or you see them against you, right? Which can be kind of painful as well. We also see things as being right or wrong, just or unjust. And some people can split on specific things, people, situations, circumstances. And some people may split on almost anything. And what's happening here when somebody is splitting is that they are seeing something or someone either very good or very evil or very bad. And so this is very interesting because a lot of folks will say, well, why can't somebody see neutrality? Why can't someone see that? Why can't they understand that life is not in extremes, right? And I think that can be really challenging for people to see when they don't know that they're actually doing this, right? So it's like when you don't realize that you're splitting, you don't realize the extremes in the lifestyle that you're living based on the people in your life. So instead of seeing somebody for, the things that they do well and the things that they maybe don't do so well, so being able to take in somebody's positive attributes and somebody's flaws, right? And being able to see them as a human being and that human beings do some good things and human beings can make mistakes, right? But what happens here is that when somebody's splitting, so let's take it directly about somebody. So somebody's splitting about a person, right? So let's say that somebody has a friend and the friend has always been this amazing, great person. And one day this friend does something. And if the person's splitting about that friend, the friend will, the person will be like, wow, this person's a horrible person. They're an evil person. And they can't see all the other good things that this person has done, right? Sometimes also splitting can lead to irrational actions, right? So doing things that are irrational, like cutting somebody out of your life for good, ghosting somebody, blocking somebody. And it's interesting how you see this in a lot of family dynamics, right? So we see a tendency of people splitting in family dynamics where one relative does something that the other relative doesn't like. And then that becomes this family feud for years and years where people talk about it over holidays because those family members do not get together. They don't speak anymore. They don't talk anymore. They haven't spoken in 10 years, that sort of thing. And it's based on, the silent treatment is based on the splitting that took place, based on the agreement or disagreement about one thing, usually is how that normally happens. And so I think that everybody to some degree has probably used black and white judgment or splitting before, right? So I think that this is something that has been used before. But I think that understanding the gray area is very important, understanding the gray area and seeing that. And it can be really challenging because one part of splitting is judgment, right? So when somebody is judging another person, they're usually judging them at their worst. They're judging them on a constant basis. And when somebody is splitting and sees somebody in the negative, usually what challenges them is they don't see themselves, they don't have self-awareness, right? So if somebody does something negative in nature, something that the other person doesn't like, they see that person as an enemy or somebody against them. When you look at splitting and you understand kind of the education of it and the psychological background of it, I think splitting was first examined in the 1800s by Janet. And then, it's interesting how certain psychologists began to describe it and understand it even better, like, Freud, for example. And I think to some degree, I think we can mostly agree to this, at least I can agree to this, that splitting to me sometimes is a defense mechanism, right? And it can be a defense mechanism used for all purposes to protect the ego, right? Because as we know nowadays, many people have opinions, and those opinions, rule their life. And in those opinions, when somebody has an opposing opinion or viewpoint, it can damage the ego, right? It can damage it because all of a sudden you're having to think about something. But if you're able to push that away, if you're able to null and void their viewpoint by null and voiding the person, you don't have to look at your situation. So not only does it benefit the ego to some degree that you will just poo-poo on an opposing viewpoint by poo-pooing on the person themselves, finding fault with that person, making them out to be bad or undesirable. Also, one of the mechanisms that folks can use with splitting is it helps them to not have to work on themselves, right? So if you're able to see somebody as being a really bad person and that same person brought up to you something that was paining them, for example, maybe, you've been verbally abusive to them, or you've, taken money from them, or they've been taking care of you financially, or you have been calling them names or making them feel bad, and they finally begin to step up and show the other side of the coin and basically hold up to their ground and create their boundaries. You're going to want to, some people are going to want to paint them in a black way, right? So if they're painted black instead of painted white, whatever that person has said holds no water. Whatever that person has said has been, basically defined as, not even interesting, not even smart, not even something that you need to even listen to. And so basically there's a carte blanche where we can keep living in our world and we've deemed these people as villains and we don't have to awaken at that point. And I know that can sound a little extreme, but it happens every day. It happens in households every day. It happens in relationships every day. It happens in friendships every day, where someone literally doesn't have that self-awareness, something is brought up to that person, and that person literally judges that other person. Now, it doesn't always have to be painted a black, right? It can also be painting somebody white, right? And so when you think about the concept of being painted black, that means that what you're doing and who you are has gone from being a decent person or a great person or the most amazing person on the planet or the love of this person's life to a horrible, mean, destructive bully, narcissist who is this awful person. And so remember, we can paint white, we can paint black. When people are splitting, they do one of those two. And it's interesting because in the beginning, oftentimes when somebody is painting you white, for example, and let's talk about that because I think the painting of white needs to be discussed. So when somebody is painting you white, you can do no wrong. You are God's gift to creation. You are everything. You are all that and a bag of chips, right? Because, you can do no wrong. And it can feel really good when you're that person that, that's that person on that pedestal. And I've talked about the pedestal phase before. I've talked about it in many videos, and we can go on and put some of those links in the description here after the show. When we put it up for podcasts, I want to put that up there as well because it's very important to understand that pedestal phase based on being painted white, right? So when we're painted white, we are an awesome person. We are all that. That person literally looks up to us, whether we're their best friend, the lover, the family member, whoever that looks like, the coworker. And you're on cloud nine because that person's literally like, oh my gosh, they're singing your praises. They're telling other people about how great you are. All these things are going on. But what happens, much like when you're painted white, eventually something has to come to an end. And unfortunately, that's the way that it is. When somebody is splitting, they're not always going to see you as perfect, perfection, angelic, right? There is another side to that coin. And that's where it can be kind of sticky. And that's where a lot of people end up getting tormented, is they get on this pedestal for a long time. And sometimes that pedestal could be years, depending on the relationship that you have with this person that has a tendency of splitting. You could be on that pedestal for years. Some people have been on that pedestal for a very long time, 10, 15 years. Some of you not so long. Maybe you were on the pedestal for 5 months. Felt good for 5 months, right? Maybe you're on that pedestal for 2 weeks. Maybe you're on that pedestal for 2 years. However, the fall from grace, a.k.a. the fall from pedestal, can be pretty painful. And it can seem like a long distance down. You can hurt your head, right? You can feel pretty bad. You can have a headache after it, a mental and emotional headache, because you go from being the savior, the best friend, the coolest person on the planet, to a jackass, a horrible person, a manipulator, a user, a narcissist. And so it's interesting how when you're painted black or you're painted white, how that looks and then how that person acts toward you, right? Because usually when somebody is splitting, they're splitting about everything, right? They're extremely happy about one thing, extremely angry about another, like to hang out with certain people, hate other people. A big facet of splitting too is cutting ties. So when people split, when they have a tendency of splitting, they have a tendency of cutting people out of their life. For one thing, it could be one simple thing. You could have been in someone's life for a long time and there could be one argument. And after that one argument, it is done. After that one argument, boom, you don't hear from them again. Maybe they go cold. They go silent. The next thing you know, you're realizing you've been blocked. You're realizing that you've been blocked on social media. All that over one thing, right? So if you've dealt with this and somebody has used splitting upon you, this podcast is going to be helpful for you to understand more about splitting. I'm going to offer some good examples, too, later on in the hour of how to really see splitting, because sometimes we don't really understand what it is, right? Sometimes we're not completely aware of what splitting is and how it's being used, and also how to know if somebody is using this on you, how to know, because it can feel extreme, especially if you've been painted white for a long time. It can be overwhelming, and it can come out of the middle of nowhere and you're not expecting it. And that can be very challenging in its own right as well. So definitely want to touch on that in today's show too, because I think this is going to be powerful information. And knowledge is power. Anytime we're dealing with, psychological components in life and understanding the human condition, being able to understand why somebody does something can be very powerful. Being able to understand what's happening at the moment can not only give us the strength, but the understanding of why it's happening and what to do next. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're examining the concept of splitting, what it is, and how to understand if somebody is doing that to you, but also to better understand what it is and the concept of it, and how to pick it up in other people, but also how to pick it up if we're doing it ourselves, how to pick up on it, understand it, see it for what it is. And right before the break, I was talking about, how splitting is the concept of black and white thinking, how it's black and white thinking, good or bad, for or against, right? So, and a lot of times when somebody's splitting, there's a tendency to split about everything. So they can split about people, things, places, jobs, bosses, friends, what have you. And it doesn't really stop. And those same people can also be masters at cutting people out of their life very quickly. So they can take someone that's been in their life for a long time, turn around, cut them out in a matter of minutes and not think about it again. And that can be very painful for someone that, you actually have cared about and they've been in your life, where all of a sudden one day there's a little bit of an argument. They don't agree with you on one thing. And the next thing you know, they're no longer speaking with you. And so this can be very challenging, very hard, and very heartbreaking for some people. And, it's interesting because splitting, it's either, making somebody out to be this angel or making somebody out to be a villain, right? So somebody can do one thing and it can take them off from angel status. And some of you out there might be in a relationship right now. It could be a family member, it could be a coworker, it could be a love relationship, it could be a friend that has you up on a pedestal right now. And they have you on this pedestal and you can do no wrong. And it feels really good because everything you do, they're like, oh, Ashley did this, she did that. Oh my gosh, she's so amazing. And that can feel really good. And you hope that it stays, but at any moment that could change, right? And so it depends on their viewpoint and how they see you. And, it's interesting because splitting, it's not just in relationships. It's interesting. It's like splitting is a lot of things that we deal with on a daily basis, right? Like think about religion, how some people think that their religion is the only religion, right? And all other religions are not valid, right? I mean, some of you don't even believe in religions, but there's some people out there that actually believe, my religion is the number one and everything else is not, and everything else has no value. Think about the concept of politics that we see every day and twice on Sunday on TV and on the news, where, one facet, one group is great in there and helping everybody, and the other group is horrible, and how polarizing this is. But, it's like it's basically blanketing two different groups of people and saying one group is villain, one group is amazing, even though that's not the case. It's an individual by individual basis, and I think most of us know that. But see what I'm saying? Like, even in mainstream media, there's a tendency of splitting, right? Even in mainstream media, you can see someone that they're talking about that they have made into this, Mother Teresa, right? But this person has other stuff going on in their life and they haven't made all the best choices. And it's good that they've made some great choices, but I think that we herald them and we put them up on this pedestal, right? Just as if when somebody does make a mistake, it's like we villainize them and their entire career can go into the tank over one thing that they've done, right? And so there's a tendency of doing that in our society today a lot. And a lot of times we don't realize that this is splitting. This is black and white thinking. And I don't know about you, but, I've lived on this planet for a while, and I've realized that when I have a tendency of having that black and white thinking, I'm not seeing the full picture. I'm not making the right decision. I'm choosing poorly, right? And I have to look at the nuances and the grayness and the neutrality of this stuff to really understand it, to really pick it apart and understand what really is there and what is the meat and potatoes about it, right? So it's very important that we begin to see that. And, when I come back from break, I'm going to be talking a little bit about, some folks that might have a tendency of doing this more than others. Also, how to deal with that, how to point it out, how to deal with somebody that's doing that to you. One of the biggest things is we have a tendency of getting down. So if somebody is making a judgment on us that's very negative, we might start taking that on as a feeling within us, and we might start judging ourselves that way. And so I want to help protect you as well. So stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in, you know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're exploring the concept of splitting, what it is, how it's used, and how to really catch it if it's being used on you, or maybe if you haven't been fully aware that maybe there might be a tendency to do that sometimes in certain relationships. And right before the break, I was talking about how I wanted to really explore. I mean, some of us, there can be a tendency of black and white thinking, right? Because maybe we were raised that way. Maybe in the family dynamic, you were exposed to mom and dad, or mom or dad, or whoever raised you, where it seemed like everything was either good or not good. Everything was either perfect or horrible. And that can rub off on you, right? It's either all or nothing. It's all or nothing. And that can really rub off on you. And I think it's interesting because when somebody is splitting, they have the inability of keeping or holding on to opposing thoughts or feelings or even opposing beliefs. Because it's so hard to see both sides, right? It's so hard to see both sides. Like, for example, if I believe that somebody in my life is a bad person, I'm able to treat them badly, right? So if I believe that somebody's a bad person, because I'm treating them badly, I'm okay with that, right? But what if that person wasn't bad? What if that person was a human being that sometimes did great things and sometimes didn't, and I'm treating them poorly and badly and maybe mentally or emotionally abusive? Then all of a sudden I have to start looking at my actions. I have to start asking myself questions, and then I have to start looking through and seeing that person in more of a 3D, 5D, 10D person instead of somebody that's just either bad or good. I find it too is that you could be raised around that black and white thinking, but also there's some other folks that have a tendency of it, because I don't really see it in the codependent community, right? I don't see a lot of folks that have codependent tendencies to be a black and white thinker, because they're very, they're very agreeable. They'll, accept a lot of things. They'll forgive a lot of things, right? And that's a big thing. Forgiving and letting go of something is a huge thing, and very hard for a lot of people to forgive and let go. Even something that happened years and years ago. And it's interesting to me when clients will ask me, well, hey, my spouse cheated on me, stepped out of the marriage, whether it was even a physical or an emotional affair, and I can't handle it. I just can't let it go. And I'm like, well, if you can't let it go, there's no reason to get back together, because you're just going to bring it up day in and day out. And that's not any way for anybody to live, for anybody involved in that group, right? So it's like eventually we have to, because there's things that person has done that's not a horrible thing. There's things that person has done that doesn't make them a bad person. They're probably done some really great things in their life. But it's like, if you want to deem somebody a nasty, gnarly, bad person, you don't want to look at those great things that they've done. You don't want to look at the help that they've done for their kids. You don't want to look at the charitable contributions they've done. You don't want to look at the things they've done for the community. You don't want to look at how loving they can be. You want to try to define them and label them. And so that can be a struggle a lot of times too, because sometimes the last thing that somebody wants to see when they are splitting is the impact that has, and how kind of, obtuse that can be in really seeing the truth. I do feel like they're outside of the codependent community, which I don't think, because I think of, the ability to take people back, the ability of accepting people. And, sometimes that's because it's the altruistic and right thing to do. Sometimes it's because somebody doesn't want to be alone, or they can't be without that person, right? But let's look at the narcissistic tendencies. So let's look at the narcissistic personality disorder. I think that with narcissists, there is a strong tendency to split, right? There's a strong tendency, because remember, with a narcissist, more often than not, when you're dealing with an overt narcissist, everybody's a winner or everybody's a loser, right? And they're going to create this bigger than life reality so that other people look up to them and admire them, and so they want, so they're constantly labeling people, right? They're labeling people as the winners or losers, the people that are successful, the people that aren't successful. They're constantly labeling that and hanging out with that group of people that they want to hang out with based on these extreme splitting thoughts, right? So, for example, if somebody's very money oriented, if somebody does not have, they might be financially okay, but they're not financially rich. If somebody's all based on, you have to have money and cars and power and all this stuff, that person doesn't have that, they're going to find a fault in that person. They're a loser, they're this, because they can't see the other value that person brings to the table. And a lot of times that's because that person, that narcissistic person that's all about the money, the reason why they're about that is that's what they have. Right? So they haven't tapped in on those other things in life. They haven't tapped in on psychologically understanding themselves. They haven't tapped in on the self-worth, self-purpose piece, right? So if somebody's tapping into that and really working on that, one thing that the narcissist will want to do is to push that away and see the fault in that type of lifestyle, since they don't have that type of lifestyle. Another situation where we find splitting is when we're dealing with people that have signs and symptoms of borderline personality disorder, right? So splitting with somebody that has borderline personality disorder can be very common. It can be very commonplace. And so if you're in a relationship with, or in the family dynamic with, or working with somebody that might have BPD, they can use splitting constantly as a defense mechanism, like we were talking about in the beginning of the show with Freud, and how Freud was talking about the defensive mechanism that splitting is, right? And that's really done, obviously, subconsciously, because they don't consciously realize, well, I'm splitting here. Look at me. This person yesterday was my best friend. This person yesterday was my favorite person, and today they're absolute crap. You know what I'm saying? So it's subconsciously done, and it's an attempt to protect against certain negative feelings, right? It's to protect against certain negative feelings. It's to protect against, the fear of abandonment. It's to protect against that loneliness and that fear. And I find it very interesting because it's like, it's that protection mechanism that's used. It's almost like the concept when I talk about the abandonment principle, the difference between somebody with BPD tendencies and the difference between codependent tendencies is that, when somebody, has BPD tendencies, because of their abandonment fear, they will run out of that relationship before you leave them, and the fear that you're going to abandon them. So they would rather leave you before you leave them, right? The codependent's going to stay in it forever trying to fix it, right? Because they don't want to be alone, right? And so you see how both people have that fear of abandonment, but both people act completely different. And that's where I think if you kind of look down that road on how the abandonment is dealt with the codependent and somebody with BPD tendencies, you can see how the splitting would be used too, right? Because the splitting could villainize somebody, or the splitting could make somebody, the most favorite person in the world, and that serves them at that time. When we speak about splitting, the all good is the idolization, right? We're idolizing something. We're idolizing a person. We're idolizing a situation, right? For example, you can idolize a situation. You can idolize a job. This job can be the most amazing job you've ever had. And then the next moment, you can devalue it. It could be the worst job ever, the worst boss ever, the worst relationship ever. So you have the idealization and the devaluation, right? And so what's happening here, though, is that goes hand in hand with folks that also have extreme feelings, right? Extreme emotions, extreme mood swings, right? If I'm constantly in my emotions and my emotions are swinging left to right, very extreme, so do my thoughts, so do my feelings and thoughts about other people, right? I'm not wired to look at things neutrally. I'm not wired to look at things universally, like, well, they did this yesterday and they did that the day before and they did this. So, but there's a couple of great things in this I'm not so happy about, right? But I'm able to put it all together and see it in its overall totalitarianism, right? And understand that, yes, indeed, this person's a decent person. They're not an angel, but they're definitely not a devil as well. But I think that when you're dealing with folks with borderline traits, because of their extreme mood swings, because of their extreme feelings, because of their inability to regulate their emotions, splitting can be used often because that's how they think in their own mind, right? Their life is either perfect or their life is horrible. And I think that's how they view their own life. They're either perfect or they're horrible. And I think that, I think if you look at their day-to-day life, they're constantly thinking from that perspective. Either they are, having a high where they're seeing their value, or they're feeling a certain way, or they're feeling stupid, or they're feeling like a complete failure, what have you. And so there's some signs of it, right? Because when we are splitting, or if somebody in your family dynamic, or if your spouse tends to be splitting or tends to do that, it's like they're making judgment of people without even getting to really understand the situation. Sometimes they can make harsh judgments on people without even knowing them, right? Sometimes the other side of that prevails. They can make very high standard judgments on someone that they don't even know and they have no idea. They can want to be a best friend of somebody that they just met a couple of minutes ago. Oh, this person's the best person I've ever met in my life. Oh, they're so amazing. Or, it can be the exact opposite. Oh, that person's just horrible. I never want to be around that person. That person's an evil person. Right? And so it's interesting how, too, if, when somebody's kind of seeing that and they have a tendency of splitting, if the person is doing things that makes them feel comfortable or feel good, they might pedestal idolize them, right? If somebody's not acting to the way that person wants them to act, not giving them the attention they want, that sort of thing, that can make them see that person as going against them or plotting against them, right? Or doing something against them. And that's something that I find often too when you're dealing with someone that might have some paranoia. And you can kind of see this sometimes, especially when you're dealing with some narcissistic folks that have narcissistic tendencies. They might have that tendency of feeling that everybody is out to get them. So if you're not responding the way that they want you to respond or the way they're used to people responding to them, you could be on that naughty list. You could be on that list of people they do not want to spend time with. And it's very interesting right when you get on that list. And I don't know about you, but I have been in relationships with friends, just like, I'm going to use that word friends kind of lightly on this, let's put it in air quotes, where everything's going well and one day or one lunch or whatever, and after that you never hear from them again, right? And it's interesting how they can villainize you over anything. And I remember too, and this is a good example, I remember I went through a cleanse. I did a cleanse this, a few months ago. Actually a few weeks ago. And I did a cleanse just a couple of years ago back. And I remember the first big cleanse I did, I had told a few people that I wasn't drinking. And I remember how literally I was basically, by some people, basically looked at as a prude and then avoided and then basically devalued. And it was interesting how some of those people never even reached back out to me again at all. But I've realized that there was part of it that disturbed them, because what I was doing is, by me saying that, I was bringing up a situation that was causing problem in their life, right? They didn't want to look at it. They didn't want to look at their drinking issue. They didn't want to look at that. They didn't want to examine that. They didn't want to look at that situation. And I was basically bringing that to their attention, and that's not something that they wanted to see. And I did not know that I was doing that. I wasn't going in there saying, oh, I'm on a cleanse and I'm not drinking because you're an alcoholic. That's not at all what was happening. But by me bringing it up and then them like categorizing it and thinking about me, and I think a lot of it was too, is that they were probably deeming me as a judger. Oh, this person's judging me while I drink. This person's making judgment. And it was interesting though how just a cleanse, just a small, 2-month cleanse could make some people just cut you off for the rest of their life. And I felt that was very interesting. And so, sometimes splitting can be pushing you away, finding fault in you so that the other person doesn't have to change, or so the other person doesn't have to feel it, right? Or fear that you're going to abandon them anyway, so they're going to define you or find fault in you, right? And so it's very interesting, because also it's a place where they can commence their power, right? So if somebody is bothering me, or I sense some sort of insecurity, or I feel something, and I'm in fear of that, I can basically regulate that person, push that person back by making my own decisions to cut them out of my life and feeling more powerful for doing that. And that causes a lot of pain and suffering in people's life, especially when they're not expecting it, especially when they're not expecting somebody to do that because they've known each other for so long. The interesting part about splitting as well is that when somebody is splitting, they can say something in the moment that they really don't believe, or they can say something in the moment because of the emotional high that they're on, whether good or bad. So they can say, hey, I want to have kids, or I want to get married, or I love you forever. Or they can turn around and say, I hate you, I never want to see you again, right? And so it's interesting how the splitting, right, can be used in day-to-day life, sentence to sentence, moment to moment, which can also make you question your reality if you're in a relationship with someone like this, because you never know where you stand and you don't know how to understand that. Stay tuned. I'll be offering more information and knowledge on the concept of splitting as I return to help you so that you can safeguard yourself and better understand the situation. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been exploring the concept of splitting and what that is and understanding that concept, because when somebody is splitting, they make extreme comments, right? I hate you. I love you. You're a horrible person. You know, you're the love of my life. It's these extremes, and it's really hard to understand if somebody's splitting what the truth is, and it can make you very confused. It can be very confusing to understand where you stand. And so more often than not, if somebody's using the splitting techniques in life, they are extremely in thought. They are extreme in emotion. And they, too, actually see themselves in very extreme ways, right? So even if you looked at the tendencies of the person that has narcissistic tendencies, right? They see themselves either, as that really successful mogul, this whole image, or they see themselves as the opposite, right? And you think about it from that perspective. When somebody's dealing with BPD tendencies, you see how emotionally they can go from extreme spots and extreme places based on their own feelings, right? And splitting really comes from a subconscious desire based on fears, right? So, many of us have been in situations where maybe you started a fight or somebody else started a fight when everything was good. And you didn't understand why is this person starting a fight? Or better yet, why did I just start this fight? And you look back at it and you realize that because of the situation, or because of the fear of the situation, or because of the uneasiness in the feeling, or because of whatever, you started that fight to offset your feelings. And you saw that person in a negative light to make yourself feel better subconsciously about what's happening. A lot of times people fight with their spouses when they have stepped outside of the relationship because part of them subconsciously and consciously feels guilt or shame, right? And so when they're fighting with the other person and they're fighting with that person, it's not really them fighting with that person. It's really them fighting with themselves, but they're taking it out on that person. And in the process might find, extremes about that person, about things that they don't like about that person, calling it out, that sort of thing. And I find that if this is happening in your life, for example, if somebody that you're living with or somebody you're working with or somebody that's a good friend of yours has a tendency of splitting, it can be helpful not only to understand this process, but it could actually help, if the person's up to hearing something, is, just bringing it up and not in a negative way. You're splitting, you're a horrible person, or you're splitting, you have a psychological imbalance. No, you just be like, hey, have you thought about this? Like, for example, let's say that they say that their friend is a horrible person. Well, what happened with your friend that makes you feel that way? And ask them, what happened with your friend? Oh, well, they did X, Y, Z. Okay. So, is there any, okay, that in and of its own, and if it's good, bad, or indifferent. And then what are some of the things that your friend's done, though, that are good things or that are positive things? And I think that as long as you can point it out in a way where it's not directly about you and them, I think that you can start getting some traction on that. So, like, let's say it's their job. Let's say, like, for example, your spouse comes home, they've loved their job, and all of a sudden one day they come home, I hate my job, I hate my boss, I hate the people, I hate it. Okay, why is it? Why? What happened? Okay, and listen to it. Okay, that happened, I understand. Now, what about all the good things that were going on yesterday? Can we talk about some of those things and start bringing it into their forefront of their mind that just because this one incident happened doesn't mean that their job is horrible. It's just that incident took place, and being able to help them understand and engage from that position and start seeing things like that. Start seeing things in the gray area more than just, idolization or devaluation, more of just instead of the pedestal into the ditch, you actually have the ability to see kind of where that neutrality is. And neutrality sometimes, when our emotions are running high, it might be challenging to really be neutral. But the more that we can be neutral by, looking at people and all that they do, accounting that, looking at situations for all that it is, instead of just that one moment that we weren't happy or that one moment that we were excruciatingly happy, whatever, but being able to look at it all relative and be able to see that in our own life and being able to see that in ourselves. And I think that can be powerful, and pointing it out to folks that are around us that we really do care about in that positive, neutral way, by pointing out something that's not scary and not between you two, but something that you can point out easily and have a deep communication discussion. If you haven't already, check out ashleyburgess.com. We have a new members page. So if you go to ashleyburgess, BERGES.com, you can click on that up banner at the very top that talks about our members site. We have a new members site and you can join for free. I can't wait to see you there, and I can't wait to see and read your comments and respond back. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time. Well, I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.